Hello, everybody. My name is Carrie, and I am presenting this today from SPIRASI, the National Centre for Victims of Torture based in Dublin, in Ireland. You're very, very welcome to the launch of our Lived Experiences series, a discussion on women, conflict, and the island of Ireland. This series hopes to shed a light on some of the personal stories from women that live in Ireland, have travelled to Ireland, and also reside abroad. My role is as the fundraising and development officer for SPIRASI, and as part of that, we're trying to raise awareness of the plight of our clients. We are Ireland's only centre for the rehabilitation of victims of torture. We provide a holistic wraparound support system to people who have arrived in Ireland and identify as having undergone inhumane or degrading treatment, in line with the United Nations Convention of Torture, Article 1. Our offices are based on North Circular Road, but we're a national charity, and we have outreach offices in 4 other places. Our vision is to support victims of torture to rebuild their life in Ireland. The way we do that is through education, rehabilitation, therapy, and providing a general service, and that we're one of the only places that deal with this very, very particular and very specialist area of trauma. I'm delighted to say that what we've done to try and raise awareness is focus on our International Women's Day efforts. We've interviewed a series of sort of women who've got experiences from politics to education, through a series of 10 or 15 interviews, which we're going to launch tomorrow on a brand new YouTube channel. I'm lucky enough to be joined by 2 of my interviewees today to have just a very quick recap on what it is we've discussed and the work that we've all done collectively. I would love to say thank you very, very much to the Dublin Arts and Human Rights Festival, who've given us this platform to do this. It's been a wonderful 7 days of 10 so far, from everything from arts, culture, different language, to people who work in the field that we work as well. And please do feel free to check out some more of their articles coming up for the last 3 days on their Facebook page. The first person I'm going to have a quick chat with on this is my good friend and colleague here, Aisling Hearns. Aisling is our therapy coordinator at SPIRASI, and Aisling, you're welcome. Lovely to see you.
Thank you.
Great.
Thanks a million, Carrie.
Would you love to take just a couple of minutes to tell us about your work and what therapy means, I suppose, at SPIRASI?
Sure, yeah, thanks, Carrie. So in SPIRASI, given that we work with survivors of torture, it's very important as part of the rehabilitation process that we include therapeutic support, psychological support. So my role in SPIRASI is managing the team that provide that as part of the wider multidisciplinary and holistic approach to rehabilitation. So for our clients, we are it's very important to us that we stand by the values of safety, choice, and empowerment. So they kind of underline all of our therapeutic processes. We have different choices of therapy that people can undertake, such as individual therapy. And of course, a lot of our clients won't speak English as a first language, so we also have access to doing that through interpreters. We have lots of different group therapies, ranging from trauma-sensitive yoga to psychoeducation and so on. And then we also have family therapy, because we do have clients who are under 18, who come as unaccompanied minors, or who come as part of a wider family network, and we provide therapeutic support for them also.
Oh, great. It's and I should tell everybody that isn't probably the half of what Aisling actually does. That was definitely the concise version there. Another question that I thought would be interesting for people who want to find out more about the series and indeed the work we do is that I think people are often surprised to hear that the National Centre for Victims of Torture exists in Ireland, or that there's a need for it, and who could possibly be utilising it. As you said, the majority of our clients are from abroad. They are asylum seekers, come refugees, and it's about sort of giving that lifelong rehabilitation and support, isn't it? The word torture is such a strong one. You know, it conjures up images of a lot of things. One of my questions was, in what way do you think torture affects women differently to men, or do you think it does, perhaps in your experience of dealing with our clients?
Mm-hmm. Well, of course, we have both male and female clients who attend the service, and given that the service is for survivors of torture, they have all undergone torture. I suppose one of the main differences between men and women would be the different types of torture that they might encounter. So particularly with female clients, there is generally sexual torture has occurred. There's also, on top of that, physical and psychological torture as part and parcel of that. But sexual torture seems to be more targeted towards women. We also find that because we work with people under the UNCAT definition of torture, which is where it is a state body that carries out the torture. It means that sometimes we don't actually have access to some female clients who should be getting treatment for their traumatic injuries. So, and for this reason, a lot of women across the world, especially in countries where they wouldn't have the same type of rights as we might have in this country, they wouldn't have access to the supports after suffering some severe domestic violence, because they can't go to the police. It's not done in that country, or that they don't have the support of the state in terms of their general human rights. So for those reasons, we do see a lot of women being referred into the service that don't strictly fit under UNCAT by the technical definition. However, there is a general comment to attach to that, which is gender and sexual and gender-based violence. And our female clients very much fit under that definition. And this can be from non-state actors. So if the state is seen as complicit, if they don't put in place procedures that will stop this violence or prevent this violence towards women. So for that reason, we do see clients who wouldn't strictly fit under the general UNCAT. Now, what we do see in our female clients in relation to the psychological consequences would be a higher rates of complex PTSD. Complex PTSD is a more pervasive form of PTSD. It's a diagnosis under the ICD-11 trauma disorders. So how it affects people is that it's a longer term disorder. So PTSD is something that's quite immediate and has very, I suppose, identifiable traits such as re-experiencing, flashbacks, nightmares, avoidance, and this overall sense of threat. So you get that with complex PTSD, but you get these additional symptoms as well, such as affect dysregulation. So using dissociation, which is disconnecting from the emotions from the event in order to cope with what happened. And you see that a lot with sexual violence. And then also disturbed relationships and low self-esteem, low self-worth. Now, of course, this happens to our male clients as well, but we're just seeing higher rates within the female population. And one of the reasons behind that is also that women and girls often suffer abuse and violence from a very young age, and it ends up being compounding instances of trauma throughout the lifetime. And that's one of the reasons we might see a higher rate in women.
Oh, thanks a million for that. And again, it's shocking and surprising, but yet to people who aren't aware of this. I would say our client base is it roughly 50-50 male to female at the moment, Ashley?
Yes, it's about roughly that at the moment. In the past, it's been a lot more so male clients, and that's just because women haven't really have access to being able to escape these countries, for whatever reasons, financial access, having children and families, and that they weren't able to leave or weren't able to bring with them. But at the moment, we are seeing a lot more women being able to access the service and being able to seek asylum.
And again, not to throw a curveball or a question at you, but it's something that came in today. Actually, we were talking about Afghanistan, and the current situation there, which is like as Nuda will probably explain. She said experiences in different geographical regions when it comes to conflict. However, I'd say, Ashley, when everybody arrives at our door, it's very, very similar. From wherever you are, people have different cultures, they have different languages, different religions, different expectations placed on them, particularly women and girls. And would you say that's a compounding factor too? For instance, our clients that come from different places. As a therapist, is it very difficult to understand and get a case, sort of an understanding of their case and their story at the beginning?
Absolutely. I mean, we try to have a sense of cultural humility and come at it from a place of we don't know, but we're open to learning from that individual, because that's really important, because you can't just say this treatment fits everyone. And we certainly don't want to be saying this Western treatment fits everyone, because we need to be open to, how different people process trauma. the different levels of resilience in each person, because again, you know, these people, they've already made it to Ireland, which shows that they have significant resilience already there. And sometimes it's just about tapping back into that and seeing how we can work with that and work with the individual within their culture, within their own personality as an individual. So with that, we look at, that's why choice is such a huge part of our treatment plan, in that we can lay out these options, we can listen to the needs, and then we can present choices to help empower someone in their own kind of treatment plan.
Yeah, thank you, Aisling. It's a nod also. We had a wonderful interview with the most recent Lord Mayor of Dublin, Hazel Chu, and she spoke at length about racism and about growing up as somebody that just looked different, but she's from Dublin. You know, her family have been very, very hardworking and putting herself through education, university. Yes, for anybody that's tuned in, when we launch this tomorrow, it's well worth a watch. I'm going to come to somebody, Baroness Nuala O'Lone, who's dialing in from a far more glamorous location than me. And we met some years ago in my previous role as a gender equality officer for a gender equality project back in Ballyshannon in Donegal. Nearly 15 years later, here we are again, discussing similar issues. And that time it was actually around UN Resolution 1325 for women and girls. And we ran a wonderful project which Nuala supported, getting women from different religious backgrounds in Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland to come together and share their differences, which actually you find when women get together in peace building can be quite few. The similarities are really quite common. Nuala, I'm delighted to have you join us today, and thank you so much for fitting us into your busy schedule.
Thank you.
And I'll get the name wrong, but you're dialing in from, it is the
House of Lords, London.
The House Parliament of Lords in London, yes, indeed, in the middle of a very busy work day. Nuala, I wondered if you would give us, and it's going to be difficult to put this into a few minutes, but experiences that you've had to date in sort of the field of human rights or justice affecting women particularly.
Yeah, I suppose I've been very blessed, and I've had opportunities which have made me feel so privileged, and which have taken me to places across the world. You know, to Timor-Leste, where I went for Ireland, to Liberia again for the Irish government. I've been to Jordan, looking at the situation of stateless Palestinians who live in Jordan in these refugee camps. And I think of, you know, so many girls, beautiful girls, young girls, just like you'd see in our schools, you know. And I remember going and talking to them about education and light and things like that. And I remember one of the girls just sitting crying, and they were beautifully turned out. They all had new school uniforms on. And I asked, I couldn't do anything. I kept on talking. And I asked when we broke, I asked what was wrong with her. And she started to cry as soon as I started to talk. And it was my accent. She heard the Irish in my accent. She'd spent her first, I think, 13 years living in North Dublin. And then family circumstances had changed. Her father had taken her back, and the only place he had to take her was a refugee camp in Jordan. And it was the poorest refugee camp of the 10 Palestinian camps in Jordan. And it's very shocking when you see people for whom there is apparently no hope. You know, I've seen it in many situations. In Timor, for example, I remember going across the mountains in these very remote areas and asking the women gathered together to meet us, you know, asking them, what can we do? How can we help? What do you need? And their needs were so simple. They'd lost everything. They'd lost homes. They'd lost their food source, which they'd grown for themselves, obviously. They'd lost their clothes and their possessions. But the first thing that they wanted, and I thought water, you know, water would be the most important thing, but it wasn't. It was security. Because if there's a security presence of some kind, you can go and get water from wherever the water is. But if you have to carry water long distances and there's no one to protect you, you're open to all the kind of things that Ashley's just been talking about, the rapes and the attacks and things like that. So that those sort of issues, which come as a real sort of, you realize just how awful the situation is. And then the situation in which, you know, in Liberia, where the women talked about trying to make a living, the menfolk had gone either to the war or being killed. So they were trying to make a living to feed their children, to keep what homes they had standing. So they were very entrepreneurial, and they would gather together and they would have a stall of some kind, selling some kind of produce. But while they were away, their children were at risk. So they got together to manage to look after the children so that the soldiers couldn't come and take the boys to be child soldiers and the girls to be used in the camps by the men. So they were facing these absolutely horrific, almost unmanageable situations. And yet still they managed to feed their children, to have, a real sense of dignity and worth. And the problem was the trauma would come back to them when they least expected it. I saw it with one woman who just suddenly disintegrated. She'd been so wonderful and so strong and so bright. And she just disintegrated in front of us because somebody had been talking about something that put her right flashback into where she had been. And you have to have such an admiration for them, because they come from situations where it's almost impossible, and yet they make the impossible possible for their children, for themselves, and at the end of the day, for their country.
I think the terminology re-traumatization, it's all new to me when I first joined SPIRASI. And I do completely understand. I remember when I first joined, I was talking to Ashley, and then she said, our corridors aren't as good as they could be because they're very, very similar. They're just straight, the doors off them. And it's absolutely what would happen when you're taken to be arrested or questioned or to a holding centre even. And in day-to-day life, those of us in the West who are privileged enough to have never experienced anything near this, I would never have realised what small things can re-trigger those awful memories that I think people do so well to repress, really. One of the questions I had as well for you, Nuala, that we've discussed in your interview, which is a lengthy one indeed, alongside Dr. Claire Dunn, who's another doctor at SPIRASI actually, and also works with Médecins Sans Frontières, was how do you think that conflict and war affects women differently?
Well, I think very often women are left on their own to cope. And they're starting off from a position in which very often the men are either taken away or go away to fight because they have to go away, or they're these marauding groups of militia come in and kill all the men in the village and this sort of thing. So very often they're left alone, and quite often the younger women are taken away too. So it's grandmothers who are left to try and raise the next generation. And I think that in itself presents an awful lot of problems because we have support services if things go wrong for us. We have doctors, we have nurses, we have wonderful people like Ashley who work with people in trauma. If you have nothing, if you have no infrastructure, nowhere to go, if you think about it, even if supposing your child is visibly, desperately ill, meningitis or something like that, and you have nowhere to go, that's a very, very hard place. So then they tend to sort of gather together and they learn from each other. They do what they can to help each other. They'll mind the sick child to allow the woman to go and plant whatever it is she needs to plant so that there's food months down the line, this sort of thing. It's that sort of sense of support and community. And they will take in those who come from afar, who are displaced, who are afraid, and help. So I found I had just such admiration for people who were living in circumstances which I just felt I couldn't have somehow borne. And yet it's not just as Aisling said, that they make their way to Ireland or whatever they do, but they also build their lives again and make the contribution that they're more than capable of making.
Yeah, I have to say, I totally agree. And I think everybody's experiences are different. I do know that the three of us are parents, we're mums. I think we might all have boys actually. And, again, you do anything at all to keep them safe, and having that taken away, I think, is a traumatic feeling and an event in itself. And I've been really privileged and so lucky to have met some of our clients virtually, not in person, in a small way in my role. And what amazes me is how some women have come through some truly horrendous times, and we've got wonderful clients who are going off now just this last September to complete their English language classes, which we run. to beginning a master's, virtually with online universities in Ireland, and they just want to know how to cope and get through it, which is, I think, fantastic.
Wonderful, yeah.
Really wonderful and so brave. It's a lot to take on. And I believe that, I do personally believe, as a committed feminist, but also in my experiences in the different roles I've had in different charities, that women play such a huge part in peace building. It's one thing to survive, it's one thing to just cope and get through these events, to let war take place in your country and then perhaps settle. And whether you have come to another country as a refugee or you stay where you are, just across the border in Northern Ireland, and we've discussed the troubles at length, yourself and myself. I think they do play a huge and very significant part in peace building. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. I can think back even just to Northern Ireland and to the women working either sides of the barricades in Belfast, these great peace walls that we have, and how they set up, and in situations in which they were under such threat, there were petrol bombs and worse coming across those peace walls, but they were working with the young people to try and keep them separate, to try and not let them come together and have another battle, a terrible battle. Yeah. And we saw that not long ago in Northern Ireland again. But they worked together. They worked with the police, the people from what you would have thought were Republican communities who perhaps shouldn't have been working with the police in the jargon of republicanism. Yeah. Yet they would work. They got the first mobile phones and things like that. They talked, they warned each other, they took steps to make sure, and then they moved from that to working together across the walls, not either side of the wall, And I saw a huge amount of that building of community out of communities that had been terrorized and demoralized and marginalized and had suffered such poverty because of the troubles.
Yeah.
And yet they began to come back and to build small economies and to build all sorts of facilities in which their children could meet, gather, know each other, so that it wasn't other, it was just this as a friend.
Yes, yeah.
And I think that's the contribution they made, yeah.
Yeah, I think so, for communities and in Northern Ireland in particular, it's an interesting arena. Everybody looks very similar. Everyone sounds the same. You can't identify one from the other on looking. It's not like that. And you don't think that's similar, but it is when you go to internationally, to sort of Syria, to Iraq, to parts of Afghanistan. And I think it's the differences that actually, once you explore them and get to work together, and I think sort of charities, NGOs, not-for-profits, the third sector, whatever you want to call it, are the people doing the such fantastic work in all of these regions. And I should say, we are the National Centre for Victims of Torture. We're where people will get referred to for medical treatment, but we are a charity. We rely on funding and fundraising. So if it only for the good of people who want to make things better, I think, do these situations exist.
We did a lessons learning project with women from Timor, from Liberia and from Northern Ireland, working together to see what commonality there was in experiences and what they could learn from what they've all tried to do, And the first thing that astonished me was that they had all identified the same problems in different contexts, but very similar problems. And they were also able to work out solutions, to share the solutions, to learn from each other's solutions, to come to a better place.
Yeah, I think that's huge. And I realise that we're coming sort of quite near to time, unless there's anything. I can't see any of the questions coming in the Q&A yet, but we have Ronan behind the scenes who's managing all of this, and he's sending anything through. As I said, everybody, the YouTube channel, if you look up SPIRASI, the National Centre for Victims of Torture, it will go live tomorrow, and we'll be uploading a video a week. We're also sharing it on our social media. We're on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter and Instagram now. And we hope to have more to come down the line, because I really would like this to be a collection of stories from women. It's a global perspective on a local scale is the best way I can put this. We all have experiences in different ways, and this should be a collection of short stories gathered in one place. Come the 8th of March next year for International Women's Day. And I really do think it's very, very interesting to hear everybody's perspective. I'm an English person living in Northern Ireland, working in Dublin, but in so many different fields. And I do think as well, for us all to get together and talk about this is such a positive thing. I'd love to thank you both for joining me today. Thank you very much, Aisling, and thank you very much, Nuala.
Thanks a million, Carrie.
Not at all. And we'll be sharing this. It's on Facebook Live. Feel free to reshare it as you wish, any of the viewers, and reach out and contact us at www.spirasi.ie for any further information. All the very best.
Thanks, Carrie. Thank you.